For decades, Ron Howard looked like the one Hollywood legend who escaped the pain, the pressure, and the darkness. But the truth behind that calm smile is a story of sacrifice, regret, and a hidden cost he never talked about until now. For decades, Ron Howard seemed perfect, a boy next door who transformed into a Hollywood legend, an image so flawless it was almost too good to be true. People saw him as the friendly red-haired kid who grew into a calm, steady director admired by everyone. He rarely made scandals, rarely raised his voice, rarely showed any anger or weakness. To millions, he looked like the one child star who never broke, the one Hollywood figure who stayed clean, normal, and humble. His early fame on The Andy Griffith Show, his success on Happy Days, and later his huge directing career made him look like someone who moved through life without stumbling. Fans admired how he shifted from acting to directing with ease, building a long list of hit films that won awards and touched audiences around the world. Whenever his name came up, people often said, "He's one of the good ones," as if he had somehow escaped the pressures that damage so many young actors. Because he kept a low profile and focused on his work, the public assumed there was nothing more to the story. They imagined he lived a smooth life, supported by a loving family and enjoying a steady rise in his career. Nothing dramatic, nothing chaotic, nothing painful. He looked like the example everyone wished their own children would follow. But that perfect image was only the surface. Behind his calm smile, Ron carried many heavy moments that the public never saw. He spent most of his childhood working long hours on sets, surrounded by adults rather than children his age. He learned early how to behave in a business full of pressure, how to please directors, how to stay disciplined, and how to avoid mistakes that could damage his career. This made him look responsible and mature, but it also meant he had to hide his confusion, his fears, and the loneliness that comes with growing up in the spotlight. Later, as he moved into adulthood, people believed he continued moving forward without struggle, but the truth was far more complicated. He faced doubt, rejection, exhaustion, and moments of deep guilt. There were times when his family life suffered because of his career, and choices he made in his professional life often came with emotional costs that stayed with him for years. His path to becoming a respected director was not smooth or simple. It was filled with risks, mistakes, and lessons he learned the hard way. People loved the idea of Ron as someone who never faced darkness, but his real story shows how even the most admired lives can carry pain. He had moments when he questioned himself, when he feared losing the people he loved, and when the pressure of living up to his own reputation became almost too much to handle. He was not someone who built his life without cracks. He simply learned how to keep those cracks hidden. And as the years went by, those hidden struggles shaped him as much as his successes did. The public image remained clean and bright, but the truth was that Ron, like anyone else, had to face choices that left marks on his heart. But what if this image, polished and adored by millions, was hiding something dark, something that even he couldn't escape? Before Ron could even say his first words, he was already in front of a camera. A child destined for stardom, but at what cost? Ron Howard was born into a family where acting was not just a job, but a daily way of life. His father, Rance Howard, had been working as an actor long before Ron was born, and his mother, Jean, was also trained as an actress. Their home was filled with scripts, rehearsals, and constant discussions about auditions and roles. So when Ron arrived, it felt natural for his parents to bring him into the same world. At only 18 months old, he appeared in a film called Frontier Woman, long before he had any understanding of what cameras or sets even meant. He wasn't old enough to recognize his surroundings, but he was already part of a business that would shape every part of who he became. Most children learn to walk and speak in their own time, but Ron learned these things while standing under bright lights, surrounded by adults and production crews who expected him to stay calm, focused, and ready for whatever the scene required. Growing up in a family devoted to acting meant that Ron's early experiences were very different from other kids his age. Instead of playing in a backyard or visiting parks, he spent a large part of his days on sets. His father worked hard to support the family, taking whatever roles he could find. Not because he wanted fame, but because he wanted to stay close to Ron and guide his steps. Rance believed that if Ron was going to work in the industry, he needed to learn it properly, not by being pushed or forced, but by being taught to understand the meaning behind every line and every action. Ron's mother also played a big part in balancing his early life. She wasn't just monitoring his safety, she understood the pressures of acting and tried to protect him from becoming overwhelmed. Together, his parents made choices that kept the family close and kept Ron grounded, even while he was surrounded by a world that demanded professionalism from a child who barely understood what that meant. Even in these early years, Ron's life began to show signs of what it would later become. He wasn't treated like a normal toddler, and he didn't grow up with the freedom most young children enjoy. Instead, he learned to behave, listen, and follow directions from adults who needed scenes done correctly and on schedule. He didn't know he was working. He simply learned that adults expected him to stand still, look in a certain direction, and speak words he didn't fully understand. While other children were learning shapes and colors, Ron was learning how to take cues and deliver lines. This early training made him mature faster, but it also meant he had to give up parts of childhood without realizing it. His parents did their best to make his life feel normal at home, but the moment he stepped onto a set, he had responsibilities no toddler should have. His father was determined to be by his side through all of it. Rance wanted Ron to learn acting the right way, and he didn't trust the industry to guide his son without his presence. He took many jobs simply to stay near Ron's work, juggling his own acting career with being a full-time support system for his child. His dedication shaped Ron's understanding of work and responsibility. Ron watched his father study scripts late at night, arrive early on sets, and treat everyone with respect. These lessons stayed with him for the rest of his life. The image of a hard-working parent doing everything to keep the night. Family stable became one of the most important influences on Ron's character. His mother added another important layer by making sure he still had time to rest, eat properly, and feel loved, even when long shooting days took most of his energy. By the time Ron was old enough to understand what acting really meant, he was already used to being part of a world most children never see. His early jobs weren't isolated experiences. They were the start of his life being shaped by cameras, scripts, and constant performance. He didn't have the chance to choose acting at that age. It was simply the path he was placed on. But because his parents were so involved and protective, Ron never felt like he was being pushed for money or fame. Instead, he felt like he was learning a craft, something that connected him to his parents and gave him a sense of belonging. Still, the reality remained. His early introduction to show business meant he was constantly adapting to adult expectations long before he had a chance to discover who he was outside of acting. Ron's early years created a foundation that stayed with him forever. Being surrounded by working actors taught him discipline, patience, and a deep respect for the industry. But it also created a life where the line between childhood and work was almost invisible. He didn't grow up in the usual way. He grew up inside a system that demanded maturity from him every single day. From the moment he made his screen debut at 18 months old, his childhood was no longer just his. The lines between play and work blurred forever. At 6 years old, Ron Howard became America's sweetheart as Opie Taylor on The Andy Griffith Show. But the world saw only the wholesome innocence behind the scenes. It was a different story. When Ron joined the show in 1960, he was a small child stepping into a role that millions of viewers would come to love. His young face appeared in homes across the country every week, and people felt like they knew him personally. They watched him laugh, cry, learn lessons, and share heartfelt moments with Andy Griffith. To them, he was the perfect child, sweet, polite, and full of charm. But the truth was that Ron was learning how to carry the weight of expectations far beyond what most kids his age could understand. He wasn't just performing, he was working a full-time job. He had scripts to memorize, scenes to rehearse, and long shooting days to follow. While other 6-year-olds played outside or went home after school, Ron reported to a set that demanded patience, discipline, and a level of emotional control uncommon for a child. Andy Griffith and the rest of the cast treated him with kindness, but kindness didn't erase the pressure. Every time the cameras rolled, Ron had to deliver his lines with the right timing and the right emotion. He learned early that if he made mistakes, the entire crew had to repeat the scene. That responsibility made him serious and careful. At an age when kids should be carefree, the viewers saw only the polished final product, not the hours of work behind it. What made things more complicated was how closely people connected him to the character of Opie. Fans didn't separate the child actor from the fictional boy they adored. Everywhere Ron went, adults expected him to behave exactly like Opie, gentle, polite, and wise beyond his years. Instead of being allowed to grow and make normal mistakes, Ron felt pressured to meet these expectations even when the cameras were off. He wasn't just acting on set. He was performing in public all the time because he didn't want to disappoint anyone. His father, Rance, stayed close by during filming and served as both teacher and protector. He often stood just out of frame, watching Ron carefully, ready to step in if he sensed stress or confusion. Rance worked hard to make sure Ron understood what each scene meant, instead of just repeating lines. He wanted Ron to act with honesty, something he believed separated good performances from shallow ones. His guidance helped Ron shine in scenes where he had to show real emotion, especially in episodes like Opie the Birdman, where a young Ron cried with sincerity that touched millions of viewers. People praised his performance, calling him unusually gifted for his age. But what they didn't see was the emotional cost. Ron had to draw from real feelings to make those scenes believable. For a child, that kind of emotional demand can be confusing and draining. Although everyone on the show tried to create a friendly, supportive environment, the set was still a workplace. Ron had a small schoolroom on site because California law required child actors to complete hours of education daily. But his school was not like a real classroom. He sat alone at a desk while a teacher supervised him, but there were no classmates, no group activities, no shared childhood experiences. The silence of that schoolroom often reminded Ron that his life was not like other children's. While kids outside enjoyed recess and played games, he studied in a room beside a soundstage, waiting to be called back to work. Even during breaks, he couldn't run around freely or be loud. Actors resting, crew members setting up equipment, and tight schedules made the environment strict. Everything in his world revolved around staying ready. Fans of the show believed Ron lived an ideal childhood because he was surrounded by beloved actors and appeared in a program filled with warmth and humor. But Ron often described those years as a golden cage. The show gave him stability, fame, and opportunities, but it also kept him confined to a life that left little room for normal childhood experiences. The show's production schedule dominated his week. He often missed school events, birthday parties, and chances to play with neighborhood kids. Even when he did get time off, he felt different from others. Children his age talked about sports, hobbies, and cartoons. Ron talked about scripts, directors, and call times. The world he lived in was small and controlled, shaped by adults who depended on his performance. Andy Griffith, Don Knotts, and other cast members tried to make him feel comfortable. Andy, especially, cared deeply for Ron and treated him almost like a second father. He would talk with him between takes, sometimes joking to ease his stress, sometimes offering gentle guidance. He always wanted Ron to feel safe in the environment they shared. But no matter how protective the cast was, they couldn't give him back the freedom he didn't have. As Ron grew older on the show, he began to notice the gap between himself and other children widening. He had responsibilities they couldn't imagine and pressures they never had to think about. His face was instantly recognizable everywhere he went, making simple things like going to a grocery store feel overwhelming. People would stare, smile, or call out "Opie," expecting him to respond like the character. He understood they meant no harm, but it made him feel like he had to perform constantly, even in normal public spaces. By the time the show neared its final seasons, Ron had become a part of American television history. Millions of viewers watched him grow up in real time. They saw his height change, his voice deepen, and his features mature. Yet, despite being so visible, he often felt unseen as a real child. His emotions, fears, and needs were secondary to the role he played. Even though his parents worked hard to give him balance, the truth was that his life belonged more to the set than to himself. When The Andy Griffith Show ended in 1968, Ron was 14 years old, already more experienced in the industry than many adults. He had lived a childhood filled with success, admiration, and opportunity, but also one filled with pressure, limits, and lost moments he would only understand later in life. While millions watched his boyish charm on television, Ron's childhood was slipping away, locked behind the golden gates of fame. Behind every young actor, there's usually a family that bears the burden. For Ron, that was his father, Rance Howard, a man who balanced acting with supporting his son's career. Ron did not rise in Hollywood by accident. His parents shaped every part of his early life, protecting him, guiding him, and sacrificing their own comfort so he could work safely in an industry that often takes advantage of children. Rance had already been an actor for years, but he never became a major star. When Ron's career began to grow, Rance understood that this could become something bigger than anything he had achieved himself. Instead of feeling jealous or disappointed, he committed himself to helping Ron succeed the right way. He accepted more than 100 small acting jobs, not because he was chasing fame, but because he wanted to stay close to his son. He spent long hours on sets, sometimes doing work far below his abilities, just to make sure Ron always had someone trustworthy by his side. He studied scripts with him, explained scenes, and taught him how to act honestly rather than forcing childish expressions meant to please audiences. His presence gave Ron a sense of safety in a world that demanded maturity far beyond his age. Ron's mother, Jean, also played a key role in shaping his early life. She understood the pressures of the industry because she had trained as an actress herself. She knew how easily young performers could be pushed, manipulated, or emotionally drained. So she made sure Ron's home life stayed calm and structured. She created routines so he could rest properly after long days of filming. She insisted on simple meals, early bedtimes, and quiet time away from cameras. She kept the home environment stable by avoiding showy spending or dramatic lifestyle changes, even as Ron's income increased. She wanted her sons to grow up believing that discipline and respect mattered more than fame. For her, raising Ron and his brother Clint in a grounded way was just as important as supporting their acting careers. Without her steady influence, Ron's early years could have easily become overwhelming. The sacrifices made by Ron's parents went far beyond daily routines. The Howard family often turned down opportunities that would have made them more money or brought more attention. For example, they refused to hire outside guardians or managers who would raise Ron on set. They believed a child should be guided by family, not by strangers with financial motives. Many studios expected child actors' parents to follow the studio's rules without question, but Rance and Jean stood firm when they believed something wasn't right for Ron. They even rejected certain roles or offers if they felt the environment would be too stressful for him. At times, this meant giving up better pay or slowing down Ron's career, but they were committed to protecting his emotional health first. These choices were not easy. Money was often tight, and acting was unpredictable. But the family chose stability over fast fame. Their sacrifices also affected Clint, Ron's younger brother. Clint acted in more than 200 roles, but much of his early career was shaped around keeping the family together while Ron worked. When one child becomes the center of attention, it can be difficult for siblings to feel equally valued. Clint later admitted that he sometimes felt overshadowed, even though his parents tried to give him as much support as possible. The family worked together like a team, but the spotlight naturally fell on Ron, and that imbalance eventually contributed to struggles Clint faced later as an adult. Still, he never blamed Ron. Instead, he remembered how much time and energy their father spent trying to guide them both through the chaos of Hollywood. Rance's sacrifices were the most visible. He took on any job, no matter how small, to stay close to his family. He appeared in more than 140 films and nearly 200 television episodes, often in minor roles that hardly paid well. Some days, he rushed from his own shoots to Ron's set so he could coach him before an important scene. Other days, he skipped roles entirely just to be present during Ron's filming schedule. His own dreams of becoming a well-known actor slowly faded as he put more focus on helping Ron stay grounded. He didn't complain, and he didn't tell Ron what he was giving up. He simply believed that a child deserved a parent's full support if he was going to grow up under the pressure of national attention. Ron grew aware of these sacrifices as he got older. He noticed the long hours his father worked, the tiredness in his mother's face after managing their schedules, and the quiet ways they protected him from the darker parts of the industry. These observations shaped his own personality. He learned humility from his father, who treated every person on set with respect, regardless of their position. He learned discipline from his mother, who insisted he finish schoolwork even on exhausting days. And he learned gratitude from both parents, who never let success go to their heads. Their guidance made him responsible, patient, and thoughtful. These qualities later helped him transition from acting to directing without the ego or entitlement that often damages young stars. Even though Ron was growing in confidence and skill, he also felt a growing sense of responsibility to repay what his parents had done for him. He didn't want their sacrifices to be wasted, and he didn't want to disappoint the people who had given up so much for his future. This quiet pressure stayed with him into adulthood. He often said that he felt lucky, but also aware that luck alone didn't build his career. It was the hours his father spent helping him practice lines, the meals his mother prepared after late-night shoots, the steady emotional support that kept him from falling apart. Their guidance gave him a foundation stronger than any fame he earned. But while Rance was building Ron's future, his own dreams were slowly fading away. Could Ron ever live up to the sacrifices his family made for him? By 13, Ron was no longer just a child star. He was trying to be a real actor. But rejection hit hard, and not even the set of The Monroes could shield him. After years of playing Opie Taylor, a character so loved that people across America felt like he was their own child, Ron wanted to grow beyond that image. He didn't want to stay frozen as the sweet little boy from Mayberry forever. He wanted to earn respect as a young actor who could do more than smile and deliver heartfelt lines. But breaking out of a famous childhood role is never easy. Casting directors didn't always see Ron as a teenager with potential. They still saw him as Opie, the innocent kid who could melt America's heart with a single look. And as Ron grew older, that made things complicated. His face was changing, he was maturing, and he wanted to prove himself. But the industry kept trying to push him backward into a younger version of himself that no longer matched who he was becoming. His first major test came with The Monroes, a Western adventure series filmed in the rough terrain of the Wyoming Rockies. It was very different from the controlled stages of The Andy Griffith Show. The wind was sharp, the land was uneven, and the work required physical effort he had never needed before. Ron was cast in the show, hoping it would open new doors for him. He wanted to show audiences he wasn't just a small-town boy in a gentle comedy. He wanted to explore something more serious, something that didn't rely on the familiar charm that viewers were used to. But even with all his effort, the series didn't last long. After only 26 episodes, it was cancelled. For the first time in his young career, Ron felt directly responsible for something not succeeding. He wondered if maybe he hadn't done enough, or if his acting was the reason the show didn't survive. Adults around him knew cancellations happened all the time, but Ron didn't have that perspective yet. To him, it felt like failure. At the same time, Ron struggled with how the industry viewed him. People still recognized him everywhere as OP. No matter what new roles he tried, fans and producers seemed stuck on the image of the quiet, polite boy next door. Even when he tried out for parts that were different, casting teams sometimes hesitated. They couldn't imagine the OP boy in roles that needed toughness, rebellion, or teenage attitude. To them, he wasn't a blank slate. He was a symbol of childhood innocence, and that symbol worked against him. Ron wanted to grow, but the world refused to see him as anything other than the character he had left behind. This kind of typecasting can crush a young actor's confidence, and Ron was not immune to it. He started to ask himself questions he had never asked before. Was he talented enough? Did he have a future in acting? Could he survive in the industry without the protection of his childhood image? His parents tried to guide him through these doubts. Rance reminded him that every actor faces rejection, no matter how successful they were as children. He explained that careers aren't built on one job or one failure, but on persistence. But Ron was young, and it was hard to accept that advice when his identity felt so tied to one single role. He began to understand how fame can become a trap, especially for someone who starts working before they even know themselves. He realized that the public's love could easily become a cage, preventing him from moving forward. The more he grew, the more he wanted to separate his real self from the character he used to play. But that separation wasn't simple. The industry wanted Opie. They weren't sure they wanted Ron. His doubts deepened when he turned down the chance to audition for The Brady Bunch in 1968. The offer came at a time when his career felt unstable, and many families would have seen it as a perfect opportunity. But Ron's parents had a rule at home. At least one parent had to be around from morning to evening every day. They wanted Ron and Clint to grow up with structure, not constant work. The schedule of The Brady Bunch would have broken that rule, so they said no. Ron understood the decision, but part of him worried. He feared missing out on another chance to redefine himself. He wondered whether people would stop calling altogether if he didn't keep pushing forward. He tried to hide these fears, but inside he carried a quiet pressure, the pressure to prove he wasn't fading, to prove he wasn't just a child star whose moment had passed. His teenage years became a constant struggle between wanting to grow creatively and trying to keep up with the expectations of an industry that didn't know how to handle him anymore. Whenever he landed roles, he worked harder than anyone. He analyzed scripts, practiced endlessly, and focused on giving mature, honest performances. But even with all that effort, he couldn't control how people viewed him. And as he grew taller and his voice changed, he felt like he was fighting against a version of himself that no longer existed, yet refused to let him go. It wasn't just producers who saw him as OP. Fans also continued to associate him with his childhood role. Ron appreciated their affection, but he also felt trapped by it. It reminded him that the world didn't always allow young actors to evolve on their own terms. These years taught him a painful but important lesson. Fame that begins too early can take ownership of your identity before you do. Ron realized that he needed to take control of his career if he wanted any chance of becoming the actor or eventually director he hoped to be. But at 13, 14, and 15, that control felt far away. He often looked at other teenagers who lived ordinary lives and wondered what it would feel like to make mistakes without millions watching. He wondered what it would be like to explore interests outside of acting or to walk down a street without being recognized. But these were questions without answers for him. His life was already shaped by the choices made years before. Still, Ron didn't give up. Every rejection and every doubt made him more determined. He didn't know exactly how he would break free from Opie's shadow, but he felt deep inside that he needed to try. He continued studying, practicing, and accepting roles that challenged him. Even small opportunities mattered because they allowed him to test himself and remind others that he wasn't stuck in the past. But his first taste of rejection felt like failure, and this was only the beginning of the cost of fame that would haunt him through his teens. At 19, Ron Howard became Richie Cunningham on Happy Days, and suddenly he was a household name. But fame wasn't as sweet as he thought. It came with its own chains. When he joined the show in 1974, he was still trying to escape the image of Opie Taylor, hoping people would finally see him as a grown actor. Instead, the success of Happy Days placed him right back into another box, one that would eventually feel even tighter than the first. Richie Cunningham was a polite, clean-cut, good-natured teenager, the kind of boy parents wished their kids would befriend. He was honest, respectful, and always tried to do the right thing. Audiences loved him immediately, but for Ron, it was both a blessing and a burden. The more popular the show became, the more pressure he felt to maintain that image. Once again, he wasn't allowed to make mistakes, take risks, or show sides of himself that didn't match the character the whole country now saw as the perfect American son. The set of Happy Days was lively, fun, and full of strong personalities. Henry Winkler, who played Fonzie, quickly became the breakout star of the series. His cool attitude, leather jacket, catchphrases, and effortless presence turned him into a cultural icon. People across America repeated his famous "IE," and his face appeared on posters, toys, lunchboxes, and magazine covers. Suddenly, the show many believed would revolve around Ron's character shifted its energy toward Fonzie. Ron handled it professionally, always supportive of his co-stars, but inside, he struggled with mixed feelings. He appreciated Henry's hard work and talent, yet he couldn't ignore that the spotlight was moving away from him. It felt like he was losing control of the one thing he hoped would redefine him. Some fans even suggested renaming the show Fonzie's Happy Days. Ron didn't want attention all to himself, but he also didn't want to disappear in a show he helped carry from the beginning. As the seasons went on, Ron's discomfort grew. He was now in his 20s, but Richie Cunningham never aged emotionally. He was stuck as the same cheerful, squeaky clean teenager, while real life around them was changing rapidly. The 1,970 seconds were filled with political conflict, war, cultural shifts, and social issues. Ron felt frustrated that the show didn't acknowledge any of that. He once suggested an episode where Richie faced a possible draft during the Vietnam War. ABC refused. They said it was too serious, too political, and too risky for advertisers. Ron realized that he had very little control over his character's development. He could suggest ideas, but the network always made the final decision. He felt like he was acting inside a tight circle with walls that never moved. He knew the audience loved Richie, but he struggled with playing someone who didn't grow, didn't question, and didn't evolve. Off-screen, the pressure was even heavier. Fame brought attention, but it also removed privacy. Whenever Ron walked through public places, people smiled at him like they knew him personally. They expected him to be Richie, polite, calm, and safe. If he ever appeared tired, stressed, or irritated, people whispered that he wasn't so wholesome after all. This made Ron feel watched, judged, and boxed into an identity that wasn't fully his. Even though he appreciated the fans, he felt his real personality getting pushed into shadows behind the image of a character he didn't fully connect with anymore. He also worried that spending too many years as Richie would damage his chances of building a directing career. He feared the industry would always see him as a childish actor and never trust him behind the camera. That fear led to a growing desire that started quietly and then became impossible to ignore. He wanted to direct. Ron had always been curious about how scenes were built, how actors were guided, and how stories were shaped. Even as a kid, he watched directors closely, asking questions, studying their choices, and learning more than most young actors even cared to notice. By the time he joined Happy Days, his passion for directing had become deep and serious. He knew that if he didn't take control of his career soon, he might get stuck acting forever in roles that didn't match his goals. But transitioning from actor to director was not simple. Hollywood didn't easily trust young actors to handle the responsibility of directing. Many producers assumed actors didn't have the skill, discipline, or knowledge needed to run a full production. Ron had to prove himself. That opportunity came during the 5th season of Happy Days. Ron approached the producers and asked to direct an episode. He explained he had been studying the craft for years and felt ready to try. At first, the executives hesitated. They didn't think America's nice kid had the toughness to control a set or handle a crew. But producer Gary Marshall believed in him and finally gave him a chance. Ron prepared intensely, writing detailed notes for every shot and planning every moment of the episode. When he finally directed A Date with Fonzie, he surprised everyone. He worked calmly, respectfully, and efficiently. He communicated clearly with actors, treated the crew with kindness, and brought a level of organization that many seasoned directors lacked. The episode turned out well, and the studio allowed him to direct more. This opened a path he had dreamed about for years, a path that wasn't tied to his face, his age, or his reputation as a child actor. As Ron directed more episodes, his confidence grew. He enjoyed the challenge and the creativity. He felt alive in a way acting no longer provided. He also realized that behind the camera, he didn't have to worry about being typecast. A director could shape many different stories, explore many characters, and build a career based on skill rather than image. But balancing, both acting and directing at the same time, was exhausting. He spent long hours on set, first acting in scenes and then shifting into director mode, planning shots, solving problems, and making sure everything stayed on schedule. It pushed him mentally and physically, but he accepted the pressure because he knew it brought him closer to his dream. He didn't complain, but inside, he felt the weight of carrying 2 roles at once. His future felt promising, but also risky. Still, acting on Happy Days began to feel more limiting each year. Ron respected the show deeply, but he couldn't ignore the growing sense of suffocation. He wanted to tell meaningful stories, not repeat the same cheerful lines. He wanted to explore deeper emotions, new ideas, and real-life challenges, but those didn't fit the show's format. Even though the audience adored Richie Cunningham, Ron felt trapped inside him. The character didn't grow with time. He stayed the same, even as Ron changed drastically as a person and artist. This growing separation between who he was and who he played made each season feel heavier. Then came the moment Ron knew he had to make a decision. The producers were considering pushing Fonzie even more into the spotlight. Merchandise was selling, and executives wanted to capitalize on that success. There were talks about shifting the show's direction even further, which meant less focus on Richie. Ron remained calm and professional, but inside, he felt deeply unsettled. He didn't want to lose the identity he worked so hard to build on the show, but he also didn't want to fight for space in a format that no longer represented his goals. This inner conflict followed him every day. He was grateful for the series, but he wanted more from life than being the face of a character he had outgrown. As the show continued, Ron spent more time thinking about directing full-time. He knew the transition would be difficult, but staying as Richie forever felt even harder. He wanted to take control of his destiny, not let the industry decide it for him. But leaving a hit show came with risk. What if directing didn't work out? What if producers didn't take him seriously? What if audiences forgot about him once he left the screen? These questions filled his mind every night. Still, he understood that staying safe was not the same as growing, and deep down, he felt that holding on to Richie too long would take him farther away from the future he wanted. While Happy Days skyrocketed him to stardom, Ron felt himself suffocating, trapped in a role that never grew, while the world around him changed. Frustrated with being typecast, Ron took matters into his own hands. He didn't just want to act, he wanted to create. And with A Date with Fonzie, he began to rewrite his own script. For years, Ron had been known as the cheerful, dependable Richie Cunningham, a character he had played for most of his teen and early adult years. While fans adored him in that role, Ron knew he was capable of more. His growing interest in directing had become undeniable, and after proving himself as a director with a few episodes of Happy Days, he realized that it was time to push himself even further. The opportunity came when the producers allowed him to direct A Date with Fonzie, an episode in which he would have full control over the shots, the pacing, and the direction of the story. This was a moment he had been waiting for, an opportunity to show the world what he could do behind the camera. But it also came with a huge risk. Directors in Hollywood weren't just artists. They were businessmen too. If the episode failed, it could damage Ron's credibility, and worse, alienate his audience, who were used to seeing him in front of the camera, not behind it. Taking the reins of the episode was not easy. The pressure to deliver a product that was both entertaining and successful weighed heavily on Ron. He knew that the show's audience had very specific expectations, and he had to balance those expectations with his own desire for creative freedom. He couldn't just make a show that satisfied the network's advertisers or kept the fans happy with more of the same. He wanted to challenge himself and, perhaps more importantly, challenge his audience. A Date with Fonzie was his chance to show the world that he wasn't just Richie Cunningham, the boy next door with a smile. He was a storyteller, someone who could shape a narrative with his vision. The episode would need to walk the fine line between maintaining the charm that made Happy Days a hit and introducing a new approach to storytelling that reflected Ron's personal growth as a filmmaker. One of the challenges was navigating the very thing that had made Happy Days successful, the formula. The show had a reliable rhythm, familiar beats that fans loved. But Ron didn't want to repeat the same tricks. He took the opportunity to explore real emotional depth in a way that hadn't been seen much on the show before. His approach was careful but ambitious. He planned detailed shots, used minimal takes, and paid attention to the smallest details to ensure everything flowed just right. The crew, initially skeptical about a young actor taking the director's seat, was impressed by his level of preparation. Ron's vision made the episode stand out, and it was a success both in terms of ratings and critical response. That success was a huge step forward for Ron, but it also came with its own challenges. While his performance as Richie Cunningham remained beloved by fans, Ron was beginning to separate himself from that role. As a director, he knew the risks of being typecast were real. He didn't want to remain in the role of the perfect teenager, the guy everyone could rely on to smile and deliver a catchphrase. He wanted to show that he had more to offer than just the boy next door image. But with that push for creative freedom came a question. Would his fans accept this new version of him? Would they still love him if he wasn't the same character they had watched grow up? The fear of alienating his audience was real. Fans had been following him for years as Richie Cunningham, and they weren't necessarily interested in seeing him behind the scenes, calling the shots. They wanted to continue to see their old friend, not a man trying to reinvent himself. Ron knew that if he wanted to make a lasting mark in Hollywood, he would need to take that risk and trust that his true talent would shine through, but he couldn't shake the doubt. Would people care about his creative work, or would they always see him as the actor from Happy Days? That question stayed with him throughout his directing career. As he took on more projects, both for Happy Days and beyond, he had to navigate the constant challenge of balancing his desire for creative control with the need to maintain commercial success. Directing wasn't just about making art. It was about delivering content that would resonate with both the audience and the studios that funded the projects. He quickly realized that in the world of film and television, creative freedom and financial success often didn't go hand in hand. Directors had to answer to network executives, advertisers, and a public that had very specific expectations. Ron had to find ways to blend his artistic vision with the pressures of the business side. Each decision he made could have consequences for his future, and that constant push and pull left him wondering if he could ever fully escape the shadow of his childhood fame. But despite these challenges, Ron was determined to move forward. Every new project was a chance to prove himself, to show that he wasn't just the child actor from Happy Days, but a skilled director capable of handling more complex narratives and bigger challenges. And with every successful project, he became more confident in his ability to steer his career in the passade, the direction he wanted. The risk he took with A Date with Fonzie paid off. But it wasn't without its emotional cost. Each new step away from acting and into directing meant leaving behind a part of the person he once was, leaving behind the comfort of being the lovable, dependable Richie Cunningham. But with creative control came the freedom to carve out a career that was truly his own. But with creative control came the risk of alienating his fans and his peers. Would he succeed in showing the world his true talent, or was he just another child actor chasing a dream? As Ron's career took flight, his personal life began to suffer. In 1991, he made a devastating choice that would cost him precious moments with his growing family. His film career had reached new heights, and he was no longer just a child star or a television actor. He was an established director with big projects on the horizon. Far and Away, a massive period drama starring Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, required him to travel to Ireland for 6 months. The opportunity was significant, a chance to create something special in a new genre, and it seemed like the perfect project to solidify his position as a serious filmmaker. But the choice to take on the film came at a high cost. His wife Cheryl was raising their children Bryce, Reed, and the twins Jocelyn and Paige while Ron was away. He promised that it would be worth it, that this was just another step in his career. But as the months passed, the emotional toll on him grew heavier. At the time, Ron was focused on the job at hand, driven by a mix of ambition and a deep love for his craft. Yet, even as he worked, a part of him couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing out on something far more important: his children's lives. While he was busy on set, his daughter Bryce was growing older, and the time he had with her was shrinking. He knew that every day spent away from his family meant missing milestones, small moments that couldn't be replicated once they were gone. For the first time, Ron was confronted with the reality that his success as a director came at the expense of his family life. He didn't just miss birthdays or school events. He missed the chance to be there for his children as they grew, missed the day-to-day parenting that bonds fathers and their kids. It was a painful realization, one that hit him hardest when he returned home after those 6 months away. When Ron came back from Ireland, he was eager to reconnect with his family. But something was different. His daughter Bryce, who had been just a baby when he left, barely recognized him. The distance between them wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. She had changed, and so had he. The realization that he had missed out on so much of her life hit him like a punch to the stomach. He felt like a stranger in his own home, and the guilt was overwhelming. He had made a choice to prioritize his career, but in doing so, he had lost the time he could never get back. The guilt he felt wasn't just about missing Bryce's childhood, it extended to his entire family. He had missed his children growing up, the little moments that bond a family. He had missed his wife, Cheryl, carrying the burden of parenting alone while he chased his dreams. He had made a career out of storytelling, but the real story of his life and his family's life was unfolding without him. The regret Ron felt was deeper than any box office flop or failed project. No amount of professional success could erase the pain of not being there for his kids when they needed him most. It was a bitter realization that he had let ambition drive him to a place where he wasn't present for the people who mattered most. This feeling of regret didn't fade quickly. It haunted him for years, even as his career continued to thrive. He knew he had to find a balance between his professional life and his family life, but at that moment, it seemed like an impossible challenge. The deeper he got into his career, the more distant his personal life felt. The guilt of missing out on his children's formative years stayed with him, and he couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, he had made the wrong choice. The impact of that choice wasn't just about missing moments with his children, it was about the emotional distance that had crept in between him and his family. Cheryl, who had always been his rock, had to carry the weight of parenting alone while Ron was absorbed in his career. When he came back, it wasn't just the distance from Bryce that he felt. It was the realization that his relationship with his wife had also been strained. Cheryl had been there, holding everything together, and Ron had been absent in ways he couldn't fully fix. No amount of success could change the fact that time had passed without him being the father and husband he wanted to be. The guilt was suffocating. He realized that professional achievements, awards, and recognition didn't matter if they came at the cost of his family's happiness. As the years passed, Ron tried to make up for lost time, but the truth remained. Those precious years were gone. His children grew up, and he couldn't turn back the clock. He had learned an important lesson about the cost of chasing professional success, but it was a painful one. The guilt he carried would never completely fade. He knew that in his pursuit of success, he had neglected the very thing that mattered most, being there for his family. The truth was, Ron had spent so much time trying to build a legacy through his work that he had forgotten to build a legacy through the relationships that truly defined his life. When he returned home after 6 months away filming Far and Away, his daughter barely recognized him. The regret hit him harder than any box office flop. Not every film turned to gold. EDTV, his directorial gamble, flopped. Ron had finally tasted failure, and it stung more than any rejection. After years of success, both as an actor and a director, Ron Howard had built a reputation as someone who could make great films. His work on Apollo 13, A Beautiful Mind, and Splash proved that he wasn't just another child actor who had been lucky. But in 1999, EDTV was a sharp turn in the opposite direction. The film, which starred Matthew McConaughey, was a comedy about a man whose life is turned into a reality TV show. It was a risky concept, but Ron believed in it. The idea seemed fresh, modern, and perfectly suited for the growing reality TV craze. But when the film was released, it didn't connect with audiences the way Ron had hoped. Critics didn't respond well, and the box office numbers were disappointing. It felt like a blow to the career he had worked so hard to build. The failure of EDTV wasn't just a professional setback, it hit Ron personally. After so many years of steady success, he had to confront the reality that not all of professional Pontiac, his decisions would pay off. In the past, his failures had been easy to brush off, but this one was different. He had put so much effort into the film, believed in the project so strongly, that its failure made him question everything. Was he still the same director people trusted with big-budget projects? Or had the pressure of success finally cracked him? The failure made him feel like he was no longer in control of his own career. He had always been the director with a clear vision, but now that vision seemed clouded. He wondered if his best days were behind him, or if he was just getting unlucky. At the same time, Ron was dealing with the personal toll of his career. The constant pressure of delivering hit films had begun to wear on him. He was working long hours, managing huge teams of people and constantly pushing to prove himself. But with EDTV and its poor reception, the cracks began to show. He had spent so much time focusing on making great films that he had ignored the emotional and mental cost of that pursuit. The success of his earlier films had given him confidence, but now he was questioning his abilities. Could he still make movies that mattered? Could he bounce back from a setback like this? The failure affected more than just his confidence. It made him reflect on his own identity. He had been so focused on external validation and success that he had forgotten why he started making films in the first place. It was supposed to be about passion, creativity, and telling stories that mattered. But with the pressure to succeed came the risk of losing sight of what truly made him happy as an artist. The lessons Ron learned from this failure were hard but necessary. He realized that success could be fleeting and that failure was just a part of the process. No one, not even the most successful filmmakers, could avoid it. What mattered was how you responded. Instead of letting the failure define him, Ron took time to reflect and regroup. He understood that mistakes and setbacks were inevitable, but they didn't have to break him. He had learned to trust his instincts, and now he had to learn to trust them again. The failure of EDTV taught him that there would always be highs and lows in his career, but as long as he kept creating and pushing forward, the lows wouldn't define his future. Despite the painful experience, Ron took the lessons from EDTV and applied them to future projects. He didn't shy away from taking risks, but he also became more careful with the projects he chose. The failure made him more grounded, more aware of what he wanted to achieve in his career, and more focused on making films that mattered to him personally. His next films would come with more confidence, but also more humility. Ron learned that success was about more than just box office numbers or critical praise. It was about staying true to the stories he wanted to tell. By the time he directed Cinderella Man in 2005, a story about the boxer's struggle during the Great Depression, he had regained his confidence and was ready to prove himself again. EDTV had been a humbling experience, but it ultimately made Ron a stronger director. He understood that failure was not the end, it was a necessary part of growth. The film industry had moved on quickly from EDTV, but for Ron, it became a turning point that led to greater clarity in his career. He didn't have to chase success or approval. He just needed to stay focused on telling stories that mattered to him. The failure didn't define him, it helped him grow. And as he moved forward, he carried the lessons of that experience with him, knowing that each film, whether a success or a failure, was an important step in his journey as an artist. As the film industry moved on, Ron was left questioning his own abilities. Was he still the same director, or had the pressure of success finally cracked him? Despite his setbacks, Ron Howard wasn't finished. A Beautiful Mind became his redemption, both critically and personally. It proved that even the greatest artists can rise from their failures. After the disappointment of EDTV and a period of doubt about his future in Hollywood, Ron needed something to remind him of his true abilities as a filmmaker. He found it in the story of John Nash, a brilliant but troubled mathematician who overcame personal struggles to make groundbreaking contributions to mathematics. The film, which was based on the real-life story of Nash's battle with schizophrenia, seemed like the perfect project for Ron to pour himself into. The script was full of emotional depth, a mix of intellectual achievement and personal pain that Ron knew he could bring to life in a way that would resonate deeply with audiences. But for Ron, this was more than just a film. It was a chance to prove to himself and the world that he could overcome his past failures and make something truly meaningful. When A Beautiful Mind was released in 2001, the Nalavai impact was immediate. The film earned critical acclaim for its emotional depth and for Ron's direction, which delicately handled the complexity of Nash's mental health struggles without sensationalizing them. The performances, particularly Russell Crowe's portrayal of Nash, were praised, and the film quickly became a contender for awards season. It was a career-defining moment for Ron. For the first time since Apollo 13, he had made a film that felt like it could win the highest accolades in Hollywood. As the awards rolled in, including multiple Golden Globe wins, Ron began to feel the weight of his past mistakes lifting. The film was not just a commercial success, it became a cultural touchstone, sparking discussions about mental illness, genius, and the human condition. It was proof that Ron's artistic vision had matured, and his return to the top was a testament to his resilience and determination. But with success came a price. Ron had poured himself into A Beautiful Mind completely. The shoot had been intense, the emotional stakes high, and the production schedule grueling. The toll on his health and well-being was significant. He worked 18-hour days, sometimes 6 days a week, and sacrificed his personal time to make sure the film was perfect. He was obsessed with making it right, but the cost was clear. He often looked back at the time he spent away from his family and the strain it put on his health. Ron had always been a workaholic, but now he could feel the physical consequences of his dedication. The exhaustion, the pressure to succeed, and the personal sacrifices made for the sake of his career were beginning to show in ways he couldn't ignore. As much as he celebrated the film's success, Ron knew that A Beautiful Mind had come at a cost. He questioned whether the pursuit of perfection in his work was truly worth the toll it took on his body, his relationships, and his peace of mind. The film's success also forced Ron to reflect on his past choices, especially his time away from his family. He knew that in the rush to achieve artistic success, he had sometimes sacrificed his family's well-being. Ron's children, who had grown up with him in the public eye, had suffered from his long hours and frequent absences. Cheryl, his wife, had been his rock, holding down the home front while he chased his dreams. But Ron couldn't shake the guilt he felt for missing so much of his children's lives, particularly their formative years. The success of A Beautiful Mind reminded him that his professional achievements were often built on the backs of personal sacrifices, many of which were out of his control. While the film brought him the recognition he had long desired, it also forced him to confront the fact that his family had paid a price for that success. After A Beautiful Mind, Ron's career entered a new phase. He was an Oscar-winning director, with a legacy that many filmmakers only dream of. But the journey to get there had been anything but easy. He had struggled with failure, rejection, and the emotional weight of chasing success at any cost. As he continued to work, Ron found himself reassessing the balance between his career and his family. He had learned that success in Hollywood could be fleeting, but the relationships he built with his family were what truly mattered. He became more conscious of the impact his work had on those around him, especially Cheryl and his children. He learned that no amount of professional success could make up for the lost time and missed moments with his loved ones. As the years passed, Ron continued to direct successful films like Cinderella Man and The Da Vinci Code, but the lessons he learned from A Beautiful Mind remained with him. The film had been a turning point, not just in his career, but in his understanding of what was truly important. He had achieved his dream of becoming a respected filmmaker, but he had also learned the hard truth that success comes with a cost. The redemption he found in A Beautiful Mind wasn't just about the accolades or the critical praise. It was about finding peace with his past choices and understanding that no amount of awards or recognition could ever replace the time he had lost. Success had come, but it had brought with it a deeper understanding of the need for balance, for personal growth, and for the understanding that perfection was not always worth the price. But success came at a price, and the toll it took on Ron would leave him questioning if his pursuit of perfection was worth it. Now, after decades in the spotlight, Ron Howard reflects on the years that shaped him, not just the career, but the family, the pain, the choices, and the lessons. From his early days as a child actor on The Andy Griffith Show to his rise as one of Hollywood's most respected directors, Ron's journey has been a story of triumphs, setbacks, and hard-earned wisdom. He's seen it all: fame, failure, and everything in between. His name is now synonymous with cinematic success, but as he looks back on those years, he's aware that the price of that success has been more than just professional. The sacrifices he made, the relationships that were strained, and the personal toll it took on his health and happiness are the parts of the story that rarely make it into the headlines. Yet, these are the parts that shaped him just as much as the accolades and awards. Ron knows that his legacy is built on both the good and the bad, the films that defined his career and the personal struggles that often went unnoticed. His successes have given him the admiration and respect of peers and fans alike, but they have also come with a deep sense of regret. He never wanted to be the parent who wasn't there, the husband who missed important moments, or the person who lost sight of what truly mattered while chasing a dream. Yet, as much as he regrets some of the choices he made, he also knows that those choices were part of the path he had to walk. There were no shortcuts to success, no easy answers. In striving to achieve greatness, he learned that the pursuit of perfection often comes with sacrifices that cannot be undone. And while he achieved everything he ever dreamed of, those dreams were built on compromises that affected the very people he cared about most. Looking back, Ron sees how much he's grown not just as an artist, but as a person. The lessons he's learned over the years have come from both the successes and the failures. He has learned that, in the end, it's not the awards or the box office numbers that define a life well lived. It's the people you love, the moments you share, and the way you balance your ambitions with your responsibilities. He has come to understand that while the world may celebrate you for your accomplishments, it's the quieter moments, the time spent with family, the personal connections you make that truly give life its meaning. But the road to that realization has been long and filled with difficult choices. Ron has sacrificed time, energy, and peace of mind for the sake of his career. And while he doesn't regret the achievements themselves, he does wonder what might have been if he had found a better balance along the way. His story isn't finished yet, but as he looks back, he knows this one truth: the pursuit of perfection may leave you with everything, but it will cost you more than you ever imagined. The price of success, as he has learned, is often paid in personal tolls that can't be measured in box office receipts or award nominations. Success may come with fame, recognition, and financial stability, but it's the invisible costs, the missed family moments, the lost connections, and the regrets that often linger long after the applause fades. Ron has achieved the kind of career that many people dream of, but as he reflects on his legacy, he's reminded that the sweetest successes are often the ones that come with the deepest sacrifices. It's a reminder to anyone chasing greatness: you can reach the top, but it's the cost of getting there that can make all the difference.